Welcome to Swing Left, Nebraska. We are the regional chapter of Swing Left, 100% run by grassroots volunteers dedicated to fighting for a more equitable, inclusive, and prosperous Nebraska and motivating Democratic-leaning voters to vote. When we don't vote, when we don't get engaged, get involved, or stand up for what we believe in, we're effectively giving up our power. Action is the antidote. When we collaborate, work together, support each other, and our shared values, we can make our voices heard, make an impact, and inspire others to join the fight. Swing Left Nebraska offers you the information, actionable ideas, and tools you need to advocate for progressive legislation and to help elect Democratic candidates who will fight for the common good for all Nebraskans. Let's mobilize, let's take action, let's go. Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the Swing Left Nebraska podcast. My name is Leah. I'm a volunteer with Swing Left Nebraska and your host. Cindy Maxwell-Ostdiek joins us again this week to discuss the latest news and insights from the Unicameral. We tackle a lot this week, including changes to the legislator rules, the permitless concealed carry gun bill, school funding increases, tax cuts for the rich, and so much more. So let's do a show. Sydney, welcome back to the Swing Left Nebraska podcast. The session is more than halfway done, but we still have not passed any bills, but that is okay. We've got a lot of work to do. The first thing I wanted to start off with, on March 28th, following the vote to move LB 574, the controversial bill eliminating civil rights for trans children to access necessary medical care, the senators debated and ultimately passed a controversial rules change introduced by Senator Erdman. He proposed the rule change after opponents used a series of bracket motions on the final day of the debate on LB 574 to take up speaking time. This is a very unprecedented move. It's quite terrifying as it feels like the majority is trying to take over the entire session and change the rules in the middle of the game. What are your thoughts on that?
A lot of thoughts on that. And thank you again so much for what you do here with this podcast and sharing with everyday Nebraskans on a weekly basis a little bit of this kind of overview about what's been happening and trying to help people see how they can take action to make our state better for all of us, all of our families, and work with the senators like the unicameral is with us being the second house. So I really appreciate you. And I want to say thanks.
Thanks you for being here. We could not do it without your help and your knowledge and what you have to offer. So thank you to you.
And I am not an expert, but it was really interesting on Monday listening to the debate about the proposed rules change. And I guess maybe just a little bit of overview for people who hadn't been following closely until now. But the legislature functions on a 2-year biennium. Each session is 2 years. And at the beginning of each 2-year session, there is a process where they gavel in the session, people get sworn in, and then they adopt the previous session's rules as a temporary measure. And then senators make proposed rules changes that are then considered by the rules committee. And that happens at the beginning of every biennium, like I mentioned. And this last January, that rules committee process was very interesting. There were 50 something proposed rules changes, just really large number of proposed rules changes. And Senator Erdman is the chair of that committee. I was watching it. It went late into the evening. It was chaotic. The format for the actual hearing changed during the hearing as it was in progress. There were senators that were told that they were going to combine some of the rules changes to present them. Some senators were told that they didn't have as much time as they were given, or other senators given earlier in the day. It's just really chaotic. And I think that was a foreshadowing for how Senator Erdman considers the for the full legislature. The full legislature adopted these rules unanimously in January. And last week, it was being debated for general file. The senators that did those bracket motion, they placed it on, then they withdrew it, and then the next bracket motion went up. They were trying to keep the conversation on these trans youth and their families with facts. There had been so much dis and misinformation and really just hateful rhetoric throughout the debate. And so I understand what they were trying to do and question whether a lot of people have questions one way or the other, whether it was within the rules, the way it was handled. But I know listening to Monday's debate that even between, I think, Senator Kavanaugh and maybe the speaker or various, I don't know if they reached out to each other with Senator Erdman or some of the people on the majority, I think that they could have worked this out behind the scenes. I think that this didn't need to come to a rules change for the full legislature. And it's very concerning that has happened.
Yeah, it is very concerning, and it sets like a new whole tone for the remainder of the session, and it feels like a tyranny of the majority. They're just taking over and doing whatever they want. Like I said, take changing the rules of the game in the middle of the game so that they can get the outcome that they want. So,
And the nonpartisan legislature actually is the amazing form of government for Nebraskans that we all have our one legislative representative. We're not actually diluting our representation by having a representative and a senator, right? We just have one senator for a district. And then we, as the second house, it's our privilege and our responsibility to take an active role in helping the legislators create the best laws for our state. And the senators within the body were frustrated with what's been happening with this filibuster. And obviously, it should just be said right now that Senator Kavanaugh has said multiple times over these last few weeks that her work to try to prevent legislation to take away trans youth access to healthcare, to gender affirming care that is supported by the American Medical Association, the Academy of Pediatrics, the psychologists, all of the major credible organizations that do this work say that this healthcare is necessary for these youth and is always provided with consent by their parents. So that's what we're talking about. And then Senator Kauth introduced this legislation, ended up prioritizing it, and the full Republican legislature has now also prioritized it. Since they did not determine that let's just take a pause, let's put this into an interim study, let's take a moment, let's reflect, let's try to follow the science. They've just been barely ahead. And so it came to a head last week. So Senator Urban and some of the senators in the majority just reached the limit of their patience. And they do have the majority, they do have the votes. And now we've seen how they will wield that responsibility and that authority. The thing about this particular change, not only was it not good for the nonpartisan structure of the unicameral, but it was not written well. And even Senator Wayne on the floor had talked about how it could have been done differently, come from a different way to handle this. So it just was not good policy all the way around that the senators persisted and they did implement the rules change. It was interesting, though, that Senator Kavanaugh, Senator Hunt, and any of the others that have been opposing LB 574, I think Senator Conrad also joined in with this, but they had a stack of 600 plus motions ready to go that were immediately dropped after this was passed. There was some part of this removed from their toolbox, so to speak, as far as the way the rules are implemented, but they have still the ability to slow this legislature down. And they had promised they would, and they seem committed. I don't know. Is the legislature majority going to come back and change the rules again?
anything's possible at this point. Let's move on to talking about the permitless concealed carry bill that advanced to the second round. The timing is pretty interesting considering we just had another mass shooting at a school. Talk about that.
I have such a heavy heart to talk about this because it seems that our elected officials at all levels of government will not take action. There are things we could be doing, could have been doing, should be doing. When we talk about Nebraska, there are things that we could have passed in the last few years that would have been good as far as safety. for our children in our state. But it's so sad to me that regarding gun regulation in our state, what the senators are focusing on instead is to deregulate. And this permitless carry bill, I think everyone needs to remember that what it means is there will be no permit process, no requirement for training, and people will be able to carry their weapons concealed without the very bare minimum that we have now. And let's be honest, the training is not extensive that's offered. My husband has taken it. My husband does have a weapon and a concealed carry permit. He went through the training process, completed the application. I'm not interested in it at all. I just have no interest in it whatsoever, but we do store it safely here at our home. We could focus in our state on trying to make sure that these people are able to access their Second Amendment rights in a way that doesn't make our students, our children, our families less safe. That's what they should be focusing on. And it's just really horrific to have this shooting and then hear the senators the very next day on the floor of the legislature talking about how we should just let people carry concealed without this permit process. And Senator John Kavanaugh had an amendment that I was interested in because what his amendment would have done is say, okay, one of the reasons they keep saying that this infringes on the Second Amendment is that there's a price for this training. It costs like X number of dollars. It's like 100 or something, a little over $100, I think, maybe two. The training is really very basic and straightforward, but at the very least, it would help anyone carrying concealed weapons to understand how important it is to not only keep their neighbors and themselves safe, but to follow the regulations, to keep themselves from being charged with carrying incorrectly if there was some other criminal charge, if they were caught up in something that they were also going to be charged with this. And so this training is however many dollars. And Senator Kavanaugh said, let's just not charge for it. Let's find an area in the budget to offer this to Nebraskans so that we can ensure safety as much as possible and then also not infringe on anyone's rights because of how some of the senators are saying it's too expensive. They were not interested in that. So I'm not sure the expense is the reason. Correct. The real goal is to just make sure that anybody anywhere can carry whenever they want.
Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney come at this bill in support, but for very different reasons than we're hearing from the other senators that are supporting this bill. Could you discuss that?
They can try. I'm still learning about the legislature and these different laws. And Senator McKinney and Senator Wayne are senators that are on the Judiciary Committee. And they also live in districts where they're telling us this impact on their community and our neighbors who are Black, Indigenous, or of color. They're overrepresented when we talk about the impact of our criminal justice system, not just in incarceration, but also throughout the process, starting with contact with the police and being charged, etc. And so I know that there's a big conversation that needs to be had about that whole reform in general. Then when we start talking about permitless concealed carry and what penalties will be attached to it if there is someone who is breaking the law and then also outside of the regulation with the concealed carry, that is what it comes down to with these amendments. And I know that the police department in Omaha and Lincoln oppose this bill, LB 77, and they have over the years, because truly what it does is it preempts local control. It makes it difficult for a police department to implement with their elected officials on a local basis what they think is important regarding safety. They oppose it. But the police unions in Omaha and Lincoln, maybe not Lincoln, but at least in Omaha, have changed their opposition to LB 77 to neutral with this amendment process that they've been working on. I know that it is something we as Nebraskans watching from the outside really need to do a lot with contacting our senators and say, we want our kids to be safe. We want our families to be able to go to the grocery store. We want to be able to attend a play or go to a public space to send our children to school and be safe from this gun violence. And we also want to make sure that our Black, Indigenous, and neighbors of color are not targeted or overrepresented in the criminal justice system because of how these laws are written. And I think that the legislators can do that. They just need to roll up their sleeves and get to work and address some of these court issues. I know that there was a lot of talk on the floor the other day about LB 77 and saying, oh, we should harden schools and we need guns in schools. We should have more people carrying more guns. And we can see that more guns do not make our children safer in school. There were so many guns in Uvalde, right? They had how many officers? And that did not make those children safe. So I think we need to also say that the solution to these problems are not more guns in more of our places that currently we're trying to restrict
Right,
uh,
Uvalde had a lot of good guys with guns, and we saw how well that worked.
because the actual weapons involved are they're created for war, not for personal, not for hunting, not for personal everyday safety, that type of thing. And it's
See,
just so sad. Yeah.
it is. Speaking of schools, the bill to increase funding to schools in Nebraska has advanced. I know you have a lot to say about that, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm very excited about the legislature advancing this funding, especially for our special education. These teachers, these parents have been telling us this is such a priority. And I know that we've not funded it at the appropriate level for so many years. And so to increase it is still not going to be at 100%. It's still not gonna be at what the recommended level of funding is, but it'll be increased so much from where we're at today that it will have an impact on these students, and that is just so important. It's our responsibility. So the good conscience are really wanting to make sure that the senators take care of this funding for educating everyone in our schools, including kids who are in special education. I'm not sure what's gonna happen overall with the school funding package. I know that Governor Killer really talked about how he wants it all to move together, but I am sure that there's going to be a lot of upcoming debate on that. So we do want to make sure we're in touch with our senators and telling, yes, fund special education in Nebraska, fund it at an appropriate level. Let's get this fixed.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to see that there is bipartisan support for this bill as well. Moving on to a bill that doesn't have a lot of bipartisan support is advancing a bill that would increase tax cuts for the rich. Let's discuss. Tell me your thoughts on this one.
A lot of people are completing their income tax forms right now. We're right at the beginning of April. And so this is on top of mind for many people. And I know that no one likes to pay taxes. No one is like excited about it. And we all, though, do want to make sure that we're pooling our resources and taking care of the public services. And we do have responsibility for our neighbors that are not something we can do on an individual case by case basis. Is I believe that's one of the fundamental things that some of the senators are saying that they just don't believe it's a responsibility of the Nebraska government to provide some of these services. So they are fine with cutting tax revenue because they are not interested in providing the service in the first place. But the tax revenue should be gathered, and I believe tax policy should be fair and it should be equitable. And the income tax cuts that are being proposed for corporate and individual are only for the top brackets. And I think that's just something I'd like to repeat. The senators on the Revenue Committee, this was written by Senator Linehan, but supported similar bills were brought by Senator Von Gillen, but the majority on the Revenue Committee and within the legislature are saying, and on the mic, that these income tax cuts should be reserved for the top brackets because they're paying the X dollar majority of taxes in our state. I like to make sure and remind everybody that we pay our taxes not based on a specific dollar amount, but based on percentage. And for the most part, our income taxes are based on percentage. And that is something that I don't think is fair when we look at how it impacts working families and struggling Nebraskans. And when we talk about families just starting out, they have kids, they're trying to not only advance themselves in their career, but they've got daycare expenses and all these different issues. When we look at how these taxes are distributed across these different brackets, it's just really shocking at the difference. And when I looked at the Omaha World Herald, there was an article highlighting the tax cut program and what was being proposed. And I will say it is difficult to penetrate because there were a lot of bills amended into the original one that Senator Linehan brought, but the fiscal note was not yet available for the total package. And so after it's now advanced, from my understanding, now they'll be doing an updated fiscal note so we can understand the impact on this long term. But this was some research on these proposed tax cuts. And they said 20% of Nebraskans, which the lowest incomes, those making less than 30,000, will save an average of $20.
Oh my gosh.
The next lowest 20%, those making 30,000 to 54,000, would save an average of $111. There was this chart put in the Omaha World Herald about the wealthiest 20% of Nebraskans see vast majority of tax cut benefits. And when you look at the income group, and they separated out by income range, 4% income group with 250,000 to 603,000, their average tax cut will be $4,000. But when you get into the top 1% tier, which is 603,000 and above, so we're talking more than half a million, their share of the tax cut is 28%. That top 1% group is getting 28% of the tax cut, and their average tax cut is $25,000. I think it's important to put this in perspective. And we had senators on the floor of the legislature trying to advocate for working Nebraskans, for working families. And the senators just were not interested. And I just don't think that most people, when they look at the numbers and realize that we're not applying this fairly, we want them to go back and work on this. They need to roll up their sleeves and get this figured out so that it is more equitable. And we also want to make sure it's sustainable and prudent for our state, because we all know from Economy 101, right? Our state will be experiencing highs and lows. It's going to all come around. It's always cyclical. And so we've had a real influx and maybe a good few years, especially when we talk about the dollars that flowed into the state during COVID. There's already been signs that it's slowing down. So I'm not sure now is the time we should be doing these dramatic cuts that will impact future legislatures and tie their hands if we really hit a downturn and it starts to cut into necessary, very kind of basic services. So those are some of the concerns about this bill. I really want them to help Nebraskans and make sure that we can try to decrease some of our taxes. But the way they're going about it is just really, really disappointing to me.
It's hurting the working person of Nebraska and this whole trickle down economics thing. Have we not learned our lesson in the last 40 or 50 years? It never trickles down, it always trickles up. And the working people of Nebraska are the ones that have to pay for it over and over again.
Yeah, I just had a friend over this week. My husband, he's just really a numbers person. And can I give a shout out to my husband? How great he is.
Shout out
Just,
to your
yes.
husband.
He helps some friends with their taxes, just completing them. He's not a tax accountant or anything like that, just helping them with their online program that people use, just with filling in their paperwork and things. And so I had a friend over the other day and she was doing this at our kitchen table. And we were talking about some of these policies and the impact it has on people. And when we're talking about people in income brackets that are where the average Nebraskan is, when there are more dollars in their account at the end of the month, that goes directly back into the economy.
Right.
Those dollars are basically immediately back into and flowing through our economy when you're talking about rents and you're talking about food and car payments and gas and whatnot. When we're talking about income levels where the average Nebraskan is, when we save on our taxes, it is directly impacting the businesses in our state in a positive way. So I really do hope that the senators work on this and find their way clear to make the package fair for everybody.
I do too. And speaking of a bill that senators are working on, and there seems to be some bipartisan unity, is the broadband bill that also advanced. Can you talk about that?
I did miss the debate on that bill, so I don't have a play by play, but I will say how important this issue is to our state. Broadband access is actually something that is holding so many Nebraskans back right now. And you talk about the western part of the state and areas in rural Nebraska. They're impacted with this for their just like their personal access. But when you're talking about for their schooling or education or for their business, I know people that are not able to complete some of the work that they would like to because they don't have enough broadband. It's just, and it's crazy that we're still facing this. It's 2023, right? We need to get this fixed. And I think everyone realizes that. And I'm hoping that the senators will make sure and do this in a way that is good for oversight because we want to make sure that this broadband access is reaching all of our neighbors throughout the state and is something that they should be careful with. These dollars need to produce action and actual broadband in these people's homes and businesses. So I'm really excited about this. It's been something that has been discussed in the legislature for years. With this influx of money, I'm really hoping that we can get this done.
I am too. Speaking of things that have been done, ooh, I am just killing it with these segues today. There was a rally in Lincoln at the state capitol on Friday, March 31st for Trans Visibility Day. Talk about that.
I was there. I attended. There were actually some rallies and school walkouts happening
Right.
across the country, but here in Nebraska as well. And I was downtown and was able to stop by and just as an adult witness and support the students at Central High School that had a rally on their steps of their school building close to the end of school on Friday afternoon. And then there were many people, and I went as well from Omaha to Lincoln to the Capitol. And it was just amazing. It was amazing to see all the support and people that came out to recognize that trans neighbors inherently deserve dignity and the respect and the ability to live their lives without any of these attacks, without any of these discriminations, without any of these really harmful policies. And it was just really amazing. My week was bookended with that actual focus. On Monday, there was a day of action to do some phone banking, to call people in Nebraska and have them call their senators and get in touch with them about how they do not want this extreme legislation when we're talking about LB 574. And then to see on Friday the support of people coming out and saying, standing up and saying, I'm here because I support my neighbors. I do not want these extreme policies. It was just really powerful. And the people that spoke, there was one person I just really want to give a shout out to, a young non binary woman. Her name is Isabella. And she had testified in, I was in the hearing when she had testified to 574 and talking about her trans brother and how important it is that we recognize that these children are just like every other brother, every other sister. They deserve to have all the opportunity in the world. They deserve to have all the support and the healthcare they need and to not be othered and attacked and restricted with how they can express themselves. It's their identity and it's inherently something that we should honor. And so she spoke on Friday, and I just, my goodness, this young person is phenomenal. And I just would like to say that I am hoping she will continue to speak up, speak out. I just think that these young people are going to really lead us. They really are. And I just hope that the senators recognize that we are needing to take care of all the young people in our state, no matter what their gender and no matter what their gender identity. And we also need to recognize that it is something that will impact our economy. And this sounds, when you talk about segues, there really wasn't a good one for that because we're talking about human rights, but we're also talking about our economy. We have so many businesses that might look at our state and not consider Nebraska because of these restrictive policies they're considering. We have so many neighbors considering moving away from Nebraska because they can't give their children the health care that the experts are saying they need. This parental rights kind of question that has come up so often about like books and all these other issues, when you're talking about healthcare, that is such a personal for parents to decide how to keep their child safe and healthy. And I just hope that the senators will reconsider their just focus and priority to try to restrict this transgender youth care, and that we can move on with the rest of the session and get some really good legislation passed.
Yes, I agree.
It has been the subject of the focus of the legislature because it is so important. And then there's only one last action that I would mention that's along these lines regarding LGBTQ issues is that there is lobby day on Monday with out Nebraska. And people will be attending the Capitol and talking with the senators about how these issues affect our LGBTQ community in general. So I hope the senators will really listen to these people's stories and how it impacts their lives and their livelihoods on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And that is something you're planning to attend, correct?
Yeah, yes. And I would make one more plug for people to make sure that they're following up on the legislature and what's going on, but also on specific issues that are important to them. One that's very much near and dear to my heart is the transparency in our government and access to the second house in understanding how the legislature is working on our behalf. And LB 254 is Senator Brewer's bill to make the recordings of the live stream of the legislature archived on the legislature website and available to all Nebraskans. It is such an important bill that would help everyday Nebraskans so they could find out more information about how these bills and laws are created on our behalf. That legislation has been prioritized by the executive committee of the legislature. But because there are so many bills in general, and there are more priority bills even that all can be addressed during the session, I'm very worried this one might not get on the schedule to be debated. And I'm hoping that if more people call and talk with their senator and say, please support LB 254, Senator Brewer's bill, that they'll move forward with that because it's something that we just really need.
Yes, because it's important that people have access to being able to view what's happening in our unicameral because this is where decisions are being made. This is where the things are happening. So, the more eyes and ears that we can have focus on that, the more people can become aware. And when people become aware and learn what's going on, the more people we can get activated to use their voice to push back against egregious bills and speak up for bills that will help all Nebraskans. Now, next week, as of now, April 1st, 12 p.m., the time of this recording. The agenda has not been put up, so we can't speak to that. But can you tell folks where they can find the agenda if they want to see if it's up when they have their ears listening to this podcast?
Yes. And in fact, I learned something new this week about the Nebraska legislature website, which first I want to say Nebraskans are just so lucky with our website. Nebraska government is structured to be accessible and something that is our responsibility to be informed. And there's so much information available on the legislature website, and it's nebraskalegislature.gov. When you go to the homepage of the nebraskalegislature.gov website, if the session is active, then you'll see what is that legislative day's activity. But if, like right now, I'm looking at the website and it says the 108th legislature first session is not in session today. It says check the calendar to see legislative activity. The legislature is adjourned until Monday, April 3rd, 2023 at 9 a.m. That section, when it is the legislative activity is right there on the front page. You can click on the day and then it'll go to the agenda. If there's any committee hearings, you can see the journal. You can see all sorts of details about what is taking place in the legislature that day. When it's not in session, though, and before that day is updated and you can't see it on the front page, you can go to the calendar view, and the legislature.gov website has the calendar off to the right that you can click on for today, for example. Or you could look on Monday, April 3rd, and pull up what is on the agenda that day. Now, it's not available yet, but when it is available, it'll be visible there sooner than when it becomes active on the front page. So you can just keep clicking, updating, refreshing. Hopefully, in the future, when they redo the website, these types of things will be more of a push notification and available to Nebraskans easier. But right now, this is where you would find the information as soon as it is placed there and the speaker sets his agenda for Monday. And that may be sometime this weekend. For sure, it would be by Sunday.
So hopefully by the time your ears are listening to this podcast, you'll be able to see the agenda and you'll have a good idea of what's to come. Before we wrap this episode up, Cindy, is there anything else you want to share with our audience?
I just want to say how heartening it is to see people become involved with the legislature and reaching out to their senators and trying to imagine how we can create better Nebraska for everyone. And I just think that we need to really not lose heart in this process because I know there's been a lot of things in the last few weeks that are for progressive people very difficult. And it is something that I think we just need to continue to take the action. And some senators we might not see as being persuadable, put it that way. But it could be that if they heard from enough Nebraskans, they would understand how it will impact potentially their future electability, or it will affect their chances regarding their political party or whatever groups or organizations or donors that they're supported by. So I think it is important that we continue to take the action. I talked to someone the other day and they said, does it make a difference? Really? What if I don't call? What if I don't email? What if I don't reach out to my senator? And I said, if enough of us continue to do this work and ask our neighbors to get involved as well, I think that these senators would listen if they heard from more of their constituents. So I just think it really is important. And that's something I would just stress.
Yes, every voice does make an impact. Cindy, thank you for being a trailblazer, going down to the Capitol to listen, to record, to get the information out, and then bringing your wealth of knowledge back to our audience so that we can continue to spread this information. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Swing Left Nebraska podcast. We believe that change happens when we come together, share our stories, and take action. We hope that our conversation has been informative, inspiring, and empowering. If you enjoyed our show, we would greatly appreciate your support and helping us reach a wider audience. Please consider subscribing to our podcast on your favorite platform and leaving us a rating or review. This helps other people find our show and join the conversation. You can also help by sharing the podcast with your friends, family, and social networks. Together, we can build a more engaged and informed community of activists working towards a better Nebraska for all. Once again, thank you for listening to the Swing Left Nebraska podcast. Cindy will be back next week to help us unpack the unicameral. Until then, let's mobilize, let's take action, let's go.
Ready, set, go. Get ready to go.